Hello and welcome. My name is Margaret Gilbert from Corporate Contracts and I'm the Director of Corporate Contracts. So welcome, and these set of videos that you can find on YouTube and elsewhere are all about how to make procurement better. That is the aim and the goal. So welcome to the word on contract matters and about contracts. So corporate contracts is about three things. One is procurement consultancy, one is procurement training, and the other is in respect to Contract Matters books that I've written, a copy of which I have here, and you'll be able to find the more details about the Contract Matters book at the end of this video. So I work for both buyer and supplier. For buyers, I just look to ensure that the process is done well and to incorporate what's necessary into the procurement process. For suppliers, I assist them to understand what the procurement process is all about and to assist them to ensure that the proposal responses they put in to buyers covers both the technical and the commercial side that buyers are looking for. I hope that this gives you an idea about what corporate contracts is about. I look forward to hearing from you. Please feel free to get in contact through www.contractmatters.com or through my email, which is margaret@corpcontracts.co.nz. So look forward to hearing from you. And these videos is all about how to make procurement better. That is the aim and the goal. So look forward to hearing from you. Thank you for listening. Thank you. So the summary of the bullet points of the previous video that we talked about in terms of the issue of smart contracts and what a smart contract was, and the need to have some protocols to take account of the technology and the components of what smart contracts are about, that there was a need for people input, that we couldn't just rely totally on technology, and that there was still need to have a vision and to promote that vision. So those were the main points. But equally, talking about technology and how we can't just have it just doesn't work totally for developed and developing countries, because in developed countries, yes, we've got the technology and stable infrastructure, but when it comes to developing countries, not so much in terms of stable infrastructure. So e-procurement doesn't necessarily work in all parts of the world, and that needs to be taken account of. So the other thing we were talking about when it came to technology and as it changes is the means of payment, and looking at the issues around technology and the need to iron out the bugs in the system to make sure there are no bugs. And lastly, perhaps the need to run a parallel system for, say, 3 to 4 months while any issues that could arise from new technology can be sorted out, so that there can be confidence to allow just the technological system to continue. But it was probably good for the first short term to have paper contracts still. So that is what was talked about in that particular video. Thank you. Before we move on, Trish, I think we need to sort of just talk about another big issue, which is about how governments are going to regulate such contracts.
Well, that's a big problem.
Yeah, and how are those transactions going to be taxed? Because if it's in the ether, so to speak,
like
then,
with Bitcoin.
Yeah, like Bitcoin as an example, then how is the governments going to get what they need from this? And that's what hasn't been worked out. So it's not only just the legal side of it, it's the politicians as well. So so there's three main issues. It's whether it's going to be accepted or not, the legalities and the politician side of things, and are they going to be regulated? So is it going to be worldwide in terms of needing to be the same for all, or is it going to be a bit like people's or countries' different laws? So you're just going to have to adapt to different laws and requirements, which is tricky again. And how is it going to be policed? So those are the issues. Do I have the answers? No, not really.
Oh, well, that's another watch this space.
Yeah, because nobody seems to have the answers on that at the moment. So that's a lot of discussion and things.
Yeah. That's going to be very interesting.
Yeah, it is going to be interesting.
And that is That's going to be a big challenge.
And that could stop things in a way, because we know how long it takes for the politicians to sort of look at these things. And
well, this is a very good thing.
It is the way.
To be ahead of the wave, if so to speak, for the procurement industry to actually be putting their minds into this particular kind of a problem. Because if government doesn't, and government has to manage a whole raft of other things, and it would be helpful for procurement to come to the government and say, this, we have some ideas around this, let's discuss it.
Yeah.
But procurement's going to have to get their act together in that. And I mean, that's all right, they'll do that. They'll do that. It's just a matter of getting together and talk.
Yeah. I think of those, the current problems, I think that the biggest one, I think from most people's perspective, is can we be sure that all the bugs are being ironed out of the technology? Because, you know, if you don't feel that, then you're not going to take it up, because you don't want it, because, you know, we've talked before about risk, and this is a big risk, and it's whether an organisation can feel that they can sort of live with that risk. So there might not necessarily be a great rush to get into this, but and so I think there'll be some hesitancy, especially from the buyer side. I think this, especially the IT suppliers, are absolutely keen as, but there's still a lot to be resolved.
Yeah, and the thing is, there's a big gap between a good idea and then implementing it.
Correct.
And if you don't have the right people in the room to discuss that, then it's really going to be hard to get it off the ground. I mean, when you think about time saved, and as far as technology is concerned, there are a lot of things that you can't beat it. You just can't beat it. Having the capacity, even via computers and email and access to file transfers and things like that, is just enormous in terms of saving time. And of course, time equals money. So what are some of the other challenges?
There's about 3 or 4, well there's probably more, but I mean, you know, covering off 3 or 4 here is certainly what a misconception of what smart contracts are and what it means, some of what we've just been talking about. And it's how to build the bridge between smart contracts and paper contracts, because what is going to be the influencing document? Is it going to be an electronic document that perhaps can be changed, as we talked about before, without knowledge, or is it going to be absolutely defined to the paper contract? So, and for a short period of time, I would think that it would be wise to stick to the paper contract, but that's me, since I'm more of a paper type person than anything else, but we've got to move with the times here. The other thing is that for the ability for suppliers to come up with 100% bug-free code, and, you know, we just, you know, is there such a thing? Who knows?
Well, we're not techie experts.
We're not techie experts.
So we've used technology, and there's been a heap of stuff that I have found has been wonderful. So it is possible, but the trial session before things are released, Microsoft could give you an answer to that one.
I think there's going to have to be a lot of, make sure that you do it before a buyer agrees to it and all the rest of it when they're looking at buying this stuff, is to actually sort of make sure it's thoroughly tested beforehand, so you can have confidence. And the other thing about smart contracts is one of the challenges is to make sure that it takes account of any change in the law that might occur. And again, are we talking about New Zealand law, or are we talking about law of whatever country, which could be different than perhaps from one country to another?
Most countries are going to want to follow their own commercial law.
One would think so.
They're not going to want to take on board something that is relevant to a bunch of countries that they don't have much to do with. So, that's initially it'll have to be national law, sovereign law.
I would think so. I would think so.
So, okay, I can see a lot of fishhooks in this, but there must be some benefits.
Yeah, there are benefits. The idea about smart contracts is that they have a program or a part of the software that sort of defines a set of rules. So rules is good, but it depends on who's writing those rules, I guess. The rules are stored and replicated so that the software or the technology knows what it should do or what not it should do. And it also looks at, can apparently focus on performance around the set of contractual obligations. supposedly without human intervention, but now is that good or is that bad? That's to be worked out, I guess. My personal belief is that sooner or later there's going to have to be a part of the relationship which can only be face to face as sort of ensuring that performance is happening, and that the program that sets these rules can also sort of show that the automation is updated that reflects payment being made.
Right.
So you'd like to see, because you can't see physical monies, or it's going to have to show sooner or later as to
whether the Bitcoin in particular has been received.
Correct.
Yeah, yeah, I can see that there would be some issues there.
Yeah, so those are the benefits. Mind you, you might say that are they totally benefits or are they still challenges or issues? So I think it's a mix of all of that.
And I think initially there's going to be some sharp eyes watching to see how the technology performs anyway.
Yep.
Most buyers and suppliers are going to watch that. If they take it on board, they're going to watch that fairly quickly, fairly carefully. Yeah. And I mean, they would have to work with each other to identify the kinds of rules. If they're both using the same sort of technology, they're going to have to work out what kind of rules are going to apply.
Yeah. So in terms of where we go from here in terms of new technology platforms, I think it's going to be a matter of keep a watching brief. I think it's going to have to see that the bugs are ironed out, and that the acceptance issue is there.
Yeah.
And
what about training?
Exactly. That's the next point. Is that if acceptance is there, and that's not going to happen until there's some communication and some training and the rest of it. So there's all that, but there's also the fact that we need to keep an eye on the existing contracts. And at what point do you cut off one and start another in terms of if it moves from paper to technology? What it means in respect to strategic contracts, which of course should be treated differently than normal type contracts.
Yes, yes.
And that was interesting that came out of yesterday at the conference, that most of the people in that room didn't even know what their strategic contracts were. So if you don't know what your strategic contracts are, then how are you going to do that if it's now in the current environment to what it's going to be in the future? So,
and I mean, your strategic contracts have to be protected because they're the ones that keep your business running.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it might be helpful to give a definition of a strategic contract, and that is one that if the supplier went away or went out of business or fell over or whatever, that would have an influence on the buyer organisation. So if that is the case, then that is a strategic contract.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And you have to treat it differently.
Yes. Yes. And guard that relationship.
Yeah.
So what about protections?
We need to have some protections in place just to make sure that you've got things covered one way or the other. You also got to be careful that you just don't assume that technology can do it all and that there's no need to keep an eye on things, because I think that's going to be the role of the procurement practitioner going forward, is to look at things from a strategic perspective and relationship perspective, and I think those two things are going to be very important. And that's one way of seeing that the protections are there and is working.
Yes, and of course they have to be legally binding as well.
Legally binding,
because the
of course.
Contract is a legal document, so anything that influences that will also have a legal perspective to it.
Now, assuming and looking positive in all this, let's hope that it all goes fine, but it seems to me, and as a contracts person myself, I would be more likely saying, okay, if we're going to go this way but it isn't working and the bugs don't get ironed out, etc., then what's the exit plan? What is the plan B to sort of get back to normal in terms of how it's always been done up to date? Now, while it's been done up to date is not necessarily 100% perfect, at least you've got some idea about what's going on. And in the brand new world of technology, of course, as it goes forward, is that you mightn't have 100% certainty. You're just hoping that it will be fine. But I've never found that hope is necessarily the best answer. I would like to think that there was something in place that you go, okay, well, it's time perhaps just to move away from this. Yeah.
So you talked about running paper and technological answers side by side, and I would say that would be
I would keep it going. I'd keep it going longer.
The trust and faith in the technology, because it comes out because referring earlier to signatures, and the fact that some of these documents can be changed. Unless there is some security put in that process, then we come back to the paper and the signature
as what's in writing.
Yeah, being the completely legal document, signed, sealed and delivered.